So you're using Wix and you're displaying your data in a repeater or in a table using a dataset, and you want to allow your users to sort that data, whether it's from A to Z or lowest to highest, highest to lowest, or whatnot. Welcome back to the Wix Wiz. I'm Eitan, and today we're going to be talking about how you can set up a sort dropdown for your data that's being displayed in Wix. So for example, if I change this to sort by year, then it'll start to sort by year from lowest to highest, etc. We're going to be doing this using a combination of no-code datasets and a few lines of Velo code. So if you want to learn how to do all that and more, we're about to get started, but before we do that, I would recommend going ahead and checking out the subscribe button right under this video, because I really don't want you to miss out on our weekly videos. They could be the thing that changes your experience on Wix and really helps you improve your website and your business. So if you don't want to miss out, I know I don't want you to, but you probably don't want to either, then go ahead and hit that subscribe button below, and let's get started. Today's topic is very tightly related to filters, even though it isn't explicitly a filter itself, and the topic is sorting. Sorting is what allows us to present the data in a certain order, whereas a filter would allow us to only display some data based on a specific criteria. For example, if we go back to this list of cars that we've been using, by the way, this is a good point to mention that this video is part of a series about filters, data filters in Wix. So if at any point you feel like something isn't clear or out of context, you might want to check out some of the previous videos in the series to understand what we've been doing until this point. So here's our list of cars in a repeater, and it's connected to our cars collection. We already have some filters that we set up over here. And you'll notice that these cars aren't really in any very specific order. So we have the make and the model of our different cars, we have the year of our different cars, but they're not in an order basically like A to Z or Z to A or years from the lowest to highest or anything like that. It's just really random based on how we put the data into our collection, which is usually date created on the collection. So the items that were created earlier might be higher up on the list versus later are lower down on the list. There are some scenarios where you might want to sort based on that, but often when you're creating a directory like this, you're going to want to sort based on something that's a little more relevant to the user. Unfortunately, Wix doesn't really give us a no-code way to allow the user to set up sorting. You can set up sorting manually in a dataset by going to the dataset. So for example, if I go over here to the cars dataset and click here connected to CMS to open up the dataset panel over here on the side, and we take a look over here at the dataset settings. And then we go over here all the way to the bottom. So you'll see that we have a sort section. And this determines what the order of our items will be. And at the moment you can see it is, as I said, from new to old. If we wanted, we could go over here and add a new sort and then choose, for example, a field such as make and decide that the order would be A to Z. Go ahead here and add sort, and then our items, you can see here, even within the editor, they have rearranged so that they are in order of A to Z based on the make. This is something that we can do as the site owner, so we can go into the editor and we can make this change. But sometimes we might want to allow the user to change between different sorting options. So for example, allow them to decide if it will sort A to Z by make, by model. Maybe they prefer see it in order of years from most recent to oldest or something like that. So that is something that we want to allow the user to achieve, and it's not something that we can really do using a no-code solution that Wix provides. So we're going to be using a little bit of code magic, nothing too complicated, in order to allow our users to sort the data inside that's being displayed on our repeater. The first step will be to add a UI element, which will allow the users to decide what the sorting criteria is. So I'm going to use a drop-down, but you can use any kind of selection input. I'm going to go over here to input, and I'm going to look for drop-downs, and I'm just going to grab one of these drop-downs and put it here under my existing filter drop-downs right over here. And I'm going to change this in the settings, and I'm going to say here, let's say sort by over here inside the field title. And we're going to want to add a few different options here for the user to sort by. So I'm just going to go over here into manage choices, and I'm going to go to add multiple choices. So let's say we want to allow the user to sort by make A to Z. We can allow them to, let's say, sort by model A to Z, and we can allow them to sort by year. And I'm just going to assume that year means that it's ascending. If you want to make it even more simple, you could also just write, let's say, make model year, and that would just mean, let's say, make A to Z model A to Z. I mean, that's a pretty standard way of sorting. Most people want A to Z and not Z to A, but you might want to allow users to do both. So you might, for example, want to have make A to Z, model A to Z, or model Z to A. We can also have. So I'm going to use these for examples, and I'm just going to put a comma after each one of these choices so that Wix knows that it's each a different option in the dropdown. And you'll see here that the dropdown has now been populated with those 4 options. Now that we have set up our UI element, we're ready to hop in and start writing some code. If you haven't done so already, you're going to want to turn on code mode if you are inside of Wix Studio like I am. So that would just be this icon over here on the side, and you'll see a prompt to start coding. If you're in Wix Classic, then you're going to find it up over here on top. It'll say dev mode, and you can go in and turn on dev mode. Once you do that, you'll have access to this IDE that we'll be using, a panel that we can write code in. And for today, we're going to be using this set sort API, okay, right over here. For those of you who have watched the previous episodes of this series, then you'll know that this looks quite similar to the set filter API that we were using on the datasets previously. Okay, so it kind of follows a very similar syntax. Instead of set filter, we have set sort. Instead of wixdata.filter, we have wixdata.sort, etc. But I'll be explaining this all from scratch, so let's hop in and start writing some code. Before we do that, we're going to want to give our UI elements some meaningful names. So I'm going to select this sort dropdown over here, and on this, in this panel here on the right side, instead of having this called dropdown1, I'm going to call this my sort dropdown. Okay, that way I know in my code whenever I see sort dropdown, it's the dropdown that does sorting, and not something like dropdown1, which I'm prone to forget if I revisit this code in 2 or 3 weeks. The other thing that I'm going to give a name to is the data set that my repeater is connected to. So let me go ahead and open up that data set. And if we go over here into the dataset settings, you'll see over here that we have this dataset ID. So instead of calling this just dataset1, I'll call this cars dataset. Okay, this reflects the name that I've given it here, and it also reflects what this car is, what this dataset is, which is a connection to my cars collection. So now that I've named those 2 things, we're ready to start coding over here inside of the IDE. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the commented out code. That's this gray code that you can see over here with the 2 dashes before it. That's just something that Wix adds in to do some explaining, but we don't actually need that in order for our code to work. We're going to be writing all of our code inside of this onReady function, so note that you want all your code to be inside over here. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to tap into the onChange event for our dropdown. There are different ways that we can do that. We can write the code out ourselves. Another trick that we can do is we can select the dropdown element just like that. And then over here inside of the code panel, we have the properties and events, and we can go ahead and select the onChange event over here, and that will automatically add in this code snippet. All we're going to need to do is grab it and move it here inside of the onReady. So this is really handy dandy for us, and this basically means that any code that we write over here inside of the onChange is code that is going to run when we make a change to the value of the dropdown or we select a different sorting option. So now what we're going to want to do is we are going to want to tap into the different options that we have in the dropdown. So we're going to get the value that the person has selected from the dropdown, and we have two ways that we can do this. Either we can say const sort equals to. So this is a new variable that I'm calling sort, and I'm going to say that this equals to, and I'm going to select the sort dropdown dot value. So whatever the value of the sort dropdown is after it's changed. Another way we could have written this out is event dot target, which is the dropdown, the target of the event, which is the change event, dot value. Okay, so these are two different ways that we can get the value of our sort dropdown. Once we've gotten the value, we're going to have to determine which of the four options the user chose. One convenient way that we can do this, since we have four different options, is use something called a switch. A switch is something that takes a variable over here, which is the key, and this is going to be our sort, and then we can determine what will happen in different cases. So if the value is equal to one of the options, let's say make A to Z, then do something. If it's model A to Z, then do something else. So for example, here I can write the value is, let's say, model A to Z, and you have to note that this has to be equal exactly to how you wrote it before when you were creating the different options. So when it's model A to Z, then we're going to do something over here. And when it's make A to Z, we're going to do something else, etc. So let me go ahead and write out all the different options that we had, and we'll meet back in order to write the logic that's going to run inside of each of these options. So I finished writing out our different switch options over here. So you can see we have model AZ, make AZ, model A to Z, model Z to A, and year. And those are exactly equivalent to the choices from my dropdown. And you'll notice that within the drop-down choices, you have both a label and a value. So if I go over here, I can edit label and edit value. And we want to make sure that our options in the sort, our different cases inside of the sort, are equal to the values of our drop-down options and not the labels. So that's important. In my case, they're identical because of how I set up the drop-down. But in your case, it might not be identical. So you'll want to make sure that you're matching the different cases to the different values. So now that we've done that, we are ready to start setting up our sort using the setSort API. So what we're going to do first things first is we're going to import Wix data up here on top. So I'm going to say import Wix data. And then over here inside of the sort A to Z, we're going to tell our dataset to change the way that it sorts the data. So I'm going to select our dataset, and remember we called this the cars dataset. And before we do any sorting, we're going to make sure that our dataset is ready. That means that all the data has loaded in our dataset and it's ready to do things beyond like filtering and sorting and stuff like that. Because if we set our sort before the dataset is ready, then that could cause it to not work correctly. So I'm going to write here onReady, and I'm going to open up a callback function inside. And inside of this onReady, we're going to select our cars dataset again. And we're going to say .setSort. And inside of the setSort, we're going to use Wix data .sort. And now comes the fun part where we need to figure out if we're going to be doing ascending or descending. So ascending is from lower to higher. And you need to think about it also in terms of numbers, but also in terms of strings. So from lower to higher would mean from A to Z. So A is lower and Z is higher. Whereas descending would mean from higher to lower or from Z to A. And there's also a difference between capitalization or not. If it interests you, you can go ahead and read different documentation about how this works, but conceptually it should be pretty easy to deduce after some thought. So since we want to do the make A to Z, so that's going to be ascending. And then we just need to tell it which field we want to use for the ascending. And that's going to be a field from our collection. So if I go over here to our code panel, into our databases and my collections, and I open this up, so these are the different fields that we have. And since we want it to be ascending, we want it to be A to Z based on the make, so we're going to use the make field right over here. So I copied the ID, and I'm just going to put that ID right over here inside of the ascending. Okay, so this should make our filter, should make the data in our repeater display from A to Z based on the make. And now we just want to replicate this based for the other options that we have here. So I'm going to copy this code snippet that we have here, and I'm going to paste it here inside of our other cases. And we're going to make some slight adjustments so that it works for the other cases. So for our model A to Z, we're going to, instead of doing ascending by make, we're going to do ascending by model. And again, you need to check what the field is in your collection and do it based on that. But if you're using the exact same setup that I have, then this would be model. And for our model Z to A, we're going to change this to model. But in addition, we're also going to need to change this to descending because it's Z to A, so it's going backwards. So we need to do descending instead of ascending. For the year, we're going to do ascending because we want year from earliest to latest. But I just need to double check what the name of the field is. So let me go over here. And this one is called the model year, and it's a number field. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy the field ID. And I'm going to put it right over here inside of the ascending for the year case. In addition to our 4 cases that match the options from the dropdown, we also have this default option over here on the bottom. Default inside of a switch is the scenario where none of the above cases has been met. So if we use the example that we're using of our dropdown, it's if the value of the dropdown doesn't match any of the 4 dropdown options. Realistically, this will only happen if the dropdown is set to null. So this might happen, for example, if we decide to reset our dropdown at some point and not have any sort at all. Or for some reason, if we got confused and our values that we put inside of the switch aren't correct, but ideally that wouldn't happen. So what I'm going to do for this default case is set it up so that the sort is completely removed. So essentially address the scenario where we purposefully set our dropdown to null in order to reset our sort. So this I'm going to do by using pretty much the same code that we used for the other sorts. So we can even just go ahead and copy this and paste it in. The only difference that we're going to have here is that instead of using ascending or descending after we set up our sort, we can go ahead and get rid of it and just have Wix data.sort. And this will essentially reset the sort. So it will resort the data so that there's essentially no sort at all, which I'm assuming is going to go to the default sort of every data set, which is created date from oldest to newest, like we saw before. Before we go ahead and start testing, I just want to make one more comment which may be useful to some of you, and that is that we're not limited to one sort option per time we use Wix data.sort. So for example, if you wanted to set up a more complex scenario, such as sorting both by A to Z in make and by, let's say, model year from lowest to highest, you could do that by adding in an additional dot ascending or dot descending, etc., in order to make a more complex sort. Okay, so there are more complex options that you can do. I just showed you the most basic scenario where you only want to sort by one specific field and not multiple fields. So now that we understand that, let's go ahead and test this out and see what it looks like inside of preview mode. So I'm going to go over into preview mode right over here. And at the moment, so it's sorted A to Z by make, because that's what I did in the data set earlier. So let's go ahead now and select model A to Z. So now you can see that essentially the models are being sorted A to Z, so numbers are coming first, and then after numbers we have this option right over here, which starts with C, because when they are a string, numbers are before letters. So 100 is before A. Okay, that's just the way it is. If I was to change this, let's say from model to Z to A, then you'll see here it's starting with T and then R, I, D, and then Z. The reason that these are coming before this, I think, is because these are lowercase and these are uppercase. So uppercase is considered higher than lowercase. So then when you're sorting Z to A, lowercase would come first. And if you did the opposite, it would be the other way around. So that's one thing to take into account, that although intuitively for us, it might be, this T, we would expect it to see it along with the other capital T's, but from a code perspective, lowercase is considered secondary to uppercase, and that's why it comes after it when we're sorting A to Z. So take that into account when you're building your data and setting up your sorting. If we go ahead and do it for a year now, so I'm just going to go ahead and select year. So you can see here now it's the lowest year is first, so 1955, and then it goes up 1963, etc. Okay, and if we want to go back to what we were at before, we just do make, and now it's sorting by make. So that is how to set up your own sort dropdown using Wix, and just a little bit of hopefully not too complex code. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you don't want to miss the future tutorials that come out every week and more tutorials specifically from this filter series, I'd recommend subscribing to the channel. The comment section is open as always, so if you have any questions or comments or suggestions about future videos, please leave those in the comments below, and I'll see you next time. That's all for now. Thanks for watching. This tutorial may be over, but that doesn't mean that your journey has to end here. YouTube will have some recommendations up above in a moment for more videos, but don't get too distracted because my eyes are over here, and on the WixWiz website we have a lot more resources for you to continue learning or get support for your business or project. We've got a blog, beginner courses, and a community forum where you can vent about Velo or post some tough questions like, why does my header have a mind of its own? On the website, you can also find my personal calendar to schedule a one-on-one and details about getting ongoing assistance from our team of Wix experts. I'll catch you later, and don't forget that every big feature was once a small bug.